Hi, I'm Keith, and this is a training video on Informant, Pocket Informant, Informant for Mac, and the purpose of this video is to just get you familiar with some of the terminology and some of the language that's used inside Informant. So across the top, we've got a list of each of the record types that are available inside Informant. So Informant has a term known as calendar. Calendars are basically your calendar where you're going to put your events. So if you have typically if you have an email account, you can have one or more calendars that are associated with that account. You might have a calendar for work or a calendar for home. Some people have different email accounts for work and for home, and you might have a different calendar associated with each one of those. Some calendaring systems, and Informant is one of those, allows you to have multiple calendars within a single account as well. So events are the actual appointments that are on those calendars. So if you're going to create an appointment, we would call that an event. You would be creating that on a specific calendar. Tasks, of course, are the action items. They are items that you intend to complete. They typically will have a start date, a due date, an action status. You might have a priority or a context or a tag. You might have some notes associated with them, or I guess comments associated with them. Notes are another record, another object, another piece of data that you're going to have in Informant, and it is really for any piece of information that you might want to refer back to at a later point in time. You've got access to your contacts. That's this other column here, contacts. So Informant does not actually have a contact database that's part of the application. It simply allows access to your existing contacts account. So now these last columns here there are ways that Informant keeps track of your information. So for instance, projects is a term that's used inside Informant to mainly refer to tasks and notes and to group them together. So if you can create a new project, and a project is essentially a grouping of multiple tasks. I think it's David Allen that describes a project. The definition of a project is anything that takes more than 2 steps to complete. There are 2 or more steps to complete would be considered a project. Okay, and a tag is like a label. A tag is a way of organizing the data that you put into Informant. So across the top here, these are some of the different data items that we have in Informant, and then down this column is a list of questions or I guess features that you might want to know if that particular feature is relevant to that record type. So for calendars can have icons associated with them. Calendars can have a color. Contexts, however, are not relevant to calendar or events. Contexts are exclusive to tasks inside Informant. So if you're dealing with context, you're trying to figure out how to organize yourself using Informant, if the way contexts are typically used is it's a term that is popular with the GTD or getting things done methodology, and a context basically defines what you need to be able to do or to carry out an action. It could be a place, a tool, or even a person. You might have a context for calls if it's calls that you're going to make, or a context for at Home Depot or something if you wanted to have a shopping list at the hardware store. So the reference here to context basically is saying, do contexts exist for calendar? So the answer there is no. Contexts do not exist for events. Contexts are relevant, do exist for tasks. Not for notes, not for contacts, not for projects, and not for tags. Okay, so now we move down to project. Project is a grouping of tasks, and we've got projects listed up above here. We use the term notebook here because notes can also be grouped together, and so there's now an option in Informant when you create a new project to have that project house tasks and notes, or just tasks or just notes. So when you create notes, you can associate those notes with a project. Okay, next here we're going to talk about saved filters. So saved filters are a feature that's primarily used related to calendar views. So you can have a saved filter that is maybe your your view that you use at home versus your view that you use at work. So maybe you don't want to look at your kid's soccer schedule while you're at work. So you could create a save filter with just certain events and tasks on that save filter. So in a lot of the views in Informant, you can have calendar and tasks together in a single view. So you would use a saved filter to control those views. All right, next is smart filters. Now, they both use the word filters. One of them is saved, one of them is smart. Yep, that might be a little bit confusing, so sorry about that. So we're going to try to clarify that for you. Save filters are for calendar, events, and tasks. So smart filters are primarily used with tasks, and essentially because tasks are related to projects, smart filters can be used with the projects as well. At this point in time, smart filters are not available for tags. All right, Informant Sync. That's the next item here on the list. So Informant Sync can be used with calendar, can be used with events, can be used with tasks, can be used with notes. Informant Sync at this point in time, it is April 2017, does not sync contacts. That could change in the future. But as of right now, Informant Sync does not actually touch your contacts. Projects. Informant Sync will sync your projects. This is another one of those reasons why you'd want to use Informant Sync, because if you're using some other means to move your data around to your different devices, like your Google or your iCloud account, you're not going to be able to keep your projects specifically in sync. You might be able to sync the tasks, but you won't be able to sync the projects. Tags is another one of those items that will sync with Informant Sync. So if you have tags on your different record types, you can sync those through Informant Sync, where you wouldn't be able to sync those with one of the other options that you can use to sync with. All right, this item here, it says, can Informant access native data for this record? So yes for calendar, yes for events, yes for tasks, no for notes, unfortunately. That is a limitation of the API that we're using, again, as of April 2017. That could change in the future, but as of right now, Informant does not have access to your native notes. Informant does have access to your native contacts, and projects and tags are not applicable because they don't exist in the native data. So those are an Informant-only type of data. Okay, now the last line here on this table is what can Informant sync to? So you've got calendar can sync to Informant Sync. It can also sync to Google Calendar, and of course you can access all of the native data itself as well. Events. These are the events that are on the calendar, and because we're syncing calendar, we should be able to sync events. That's true. So Informant Sync or Google Calendar. Now, if you're using 365 or if you're using your iCloud account, you're actually just going to be using native data. So Informant is really just connecting to the native data that's already on your phone to access and to update those records. So it's not truly syncing with the Microsoft or the Apple server as far as that goes. It's just accessing the native data on your device. Okay, for tasks. So for tasks, you've got Informant Sync, you've got Google Tasks, and you've got Toodle-Do. Now, be warned, Google Tasks do not have anywhere near the amount of options, I guess you could say, or the attributes with your tasks. So it's quite possible if you're syncing with Google Tasks that you do stuff here in Informant, like associate a color or a tag, or even start and due dates. And if you sync to Google, then some of those are going to just not exist because they don't exist there in Google. All right, can sync to Notes. Notes can sync to Informant Sync. Notes can sync to Evernote. And Notes can sync also to Toodle-Do. Contacts. As I mentioned before, there is no contact sync. There is native data contact access, but no sync. Projects. All right, your projects can sync with Informant Sync, with Evernote, with Toodle-Do, and Google. Tags. Informant Sync, Evernote, and Toodle-Do. Those other third parties do have a record to deal with tags, and so it is possible for those to sync. All right, there should be some additional information below this video in this blog post to clarify anything that that maybe I misspoke on this video. But hopefully you find this a little bit helpful in understanding some of the features that are available inside Informant and some of the language that's used in some of the different areas. And take a look at some of the other videos and make sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get informed whenever we put out a new video. Thanks, have a great day, and stay productive.